Are there places in the world where it is easier to manage that first? And then the second part of that is easier is not always necessarily better for the outcome in terms of whether it's the investor, the environment, governance, social, all those things that we take into account. So there's a level of complexity there even when we start to talk about various jurisdictions around the world where the mining is happening.
I think geopolitics is one of the biggest risk factors of the industry today, and even jurisdictions that one may have thought are much more approachable, and we see what's happened in Panama with Cobre Panama and First Quantum. I think that is a risk that really has increased in terms of the industry, and I think with the inshoring, a lot of countries are looking at their own natural resources and saying either you need to build processing here or the economic benefits that the country shares with a particular mining industry may not be enough back to this is the way that we always did it,
right.
And we're providing jobs and we're building schools and communities, and therefore it's okay that we're mining in a particular country. I think we're going to continue to see the complexity of how those relationships are defined between countries and mining companies that are accessing natural resources in those countries. To be something that we're going to have to work at more, and also at the early stage, not exactly once you have spent $10 billion and build a very large copper mine, but working to define those relationships earlier and looking at the economic benefit being much greater to the host country.
Well, right over your shoulder there's a kiosk, and it's a rather large site there for Kazakhstan, and they're here. And I say that only because when we look at, you talk about the geopolitical issues, there's a different posture when we talk about the countries from the former Soviet Union or Russia itself and so on. And we know, not to get into a conversation necessarily about Ukraine and Russia, but the approach to ownership, the approach to how the investments are allocated, who gets what out of all of that, even there, I mean, it becomes a bit of a hazardous journey, let's say.
That's right.
Sometimes trying to figure out where the best directions are. And, even on their list, they talk about a lot of the things that Kazakhstan is actually mining. We're number 2 in this, we're number 1 in that. And the fact of the matter is, oftentimes, those are minerals that we need around the world, not just in Kazakhstan.
That's right.
So it's a real dance that has to be played to make sure that we're getting it out of there, that we're not actually, if we want to get into a whole question around human rights and all that becomes a very fast and slippery conversation.
It sure does, and investors are a lot more focused on that. So geopolitical risk, understanding what's happening in a particular country, either from a security perspective, you talked about West Africa, a number of countries there have had military coups. You talk about Kazakhstan, a huge uranium miner that provides almost half of the uranium that's being used by Russia and China. So you're digging deep, and the investors are a lot more focused on how they allocate capital based on those jurisdictions. So we have an incredible opportunity, obviously, in Canada, because we've got the stability, whatever you might want to say about whatever government is.
Well, rule of law
there.
matters.
Rule of law,
right?
Exactly. We've got that. We've got the talent. The mining industry plays such a critical role in our country. We've got the schools. Although I think we've got to do a better job at making this industry more attractive to the new generation. We've got an unbelievable natural endowment from a geology perspective and so on. And so that really presents a tremendous opportunity for our country to really get back to, I think, being a premier destination for companies and for capital.
Yeah, Minister Rickford was here this morning, the Minister of Northern Affairs, and he was talking specifically about investments that the Ontario government is going to make in a number of mining companies in Northern Ontario. But I thought it was interesting that in the course of his conversation, he pointed out the sort of the balance between forestry and mining.
Yeah.
And in that case, let's face it, it's hard to say that gold is a renewable resource. We can't really,
Sure.
we'll wait a little while to get the next batch. But the need to be able to say we are blessed with the geology that allows us to have this kind of leadership role. We have this kind of boreal forest that gives us this opportunity to have a leadership role around the world. My own sense of this, and I'm just kind of scratching the surface, I'm not certain we're telling a good enough story about this.
Yeah, I think we got to do a better job at it, and I think we've seen a series of announcements over the last couple of months where, there was a renewed focus on permitting and that realization of, wow, it takes quite a long time to permit a mine in Canada, where you've got the provincial and the federal processes if both of them come into play, and
then Indigenous communities, First Nations,
that's right. And it seems like the permitting process has been a sequential process, which really adds to the timeline. So I see a renewed focus around how do we make permitting more efficient, not make it easier, but make it more efficient, and that transparency and knowing what the milestones are and knowing that you can get through a process within X period of time, provided you meet your own milestones, that's really, really critical. I look at, I'm on a board of a company in Brazil, and the company has 6 mines and 3 smelters. And say what you will about Brazil, but the permitting process is very efficient at the end of the day. And so I think that's something that we're going to see movement on, and that was a commitment that was made by Minister Wilkinson on that. And I think bringing together, and the one piece for us is infrastructure, right? And I don't know if Minister Rickford talked about that, but let's take Ring of Fire, for example, right?
Yep.
And so perhaps, if, not an investment directly into a mining company, but how do we work together with governments, communities to build that infrastructure? We see mining companies.
Just the roads.
That's right. I mean, I think Agnico has built 300 kilometers of roads and none of it, right? And so I think there are real opportunities to think about the partnerships and how we can bring it all together